This is basically as close as I get to reliving my childhood of running down the stairs to open up Legos on Christmas morning. So let's get to it.
Make ready! Aim!
Hey there, Rivero 311, former Marine infantryman, Revolutionary War reenactor, and amateur history enthusiast. And today I want to take a look at this. This is my latest auction win. This is an American-made Charleville Musket from 1816, made at the Harpers Ferry Arsenal. So in this video, I just want to go over the win. We're going to do a first impressions. We're going to look over the musket, talk about the auction, what I'm looking for as a collector, what I'm looking out for as a collector as well. So that's going to include the proof marks, the inspector's markings, the stampings, the lock, the cock, the stock, all the other things that go into collecting antique firearms. And then I want to talk about the history of these Type 3 Charleville muskets, what they really were, and then a history of early American arms production. And then in the ending part, I want to break out my French Infantry Musket and compare that to this. This is very similar to those. And then also I want you to know that there's actually something I got wrong when I bought this, when I won this auction online. And in the end, I'm going to tell you what's wrong about this gun. So if you can kind of pick it up through the video, go ahead and it'll be a little game for you. But there's something about this gun that is not quite right. And it fooled me. I'm just going to be honest, it fooled me when I looked online. I thought I had done some good due diligence, but in the end I had some things that were off. But that's all part of the fun of learning and collecting, is you learn from your mistakes. And I'm going to try to use this video. Hopefully you can watch this and learn. I'm an amateur arms collector. I just have books that I read. It's so much information to ingest. So I'm just trying my best to put together my Harpers Ferry Musket collection. And this is one step in the direction to completing that goal for me. If you like this sort of content, like, subscribe to the channel, you know what to do, but let's get started.
So here is the musket in my very high quality light box, as you can see. You can see Harpers Ferry 1816 stamped right there at the left side of the lock plate. All right, let's get that naming convention out of the way. So these muskets were never known as the model of 1795. That is a later term, a collector's term, a historian term. They're actually just called Charleville muskets. And the naming for Charleville is interesting because that doesn't come from the French musket. The French muskets were just known as French muskets during the American Revolutionary War. In reality, they were French infantry muskets. They were a model of 1766 with the 68 and the 1770 or the 1771 improvements. But that's a video for another day. Just know that these are referred to as Charlevilles. This comes from naming nomenclature after the American Revolutionary War. They're just trying to decide on what pattern of musket to make, and the American arsenals actually come up with the word Charleville, or at least the American gunsmiths, the ones that decide that they're going to make it, they select Charleville as the word. Charleville is one of the royal arsenals in France at the time. There's Marburg and Saint-Étienne, but I'll have another video that kind of goes over that because it's a really interesting topic. But here it is, your Harpers Ferry Charleville musket. All right, and now the second part I want to talk about is these types. So those, the type 1, 2, and 3, there are 3 types of Charleville muskets made at Harpers Ferry. The first type is made from 1800 to 1805. The second type is made at 1808 to 1812. And the third type is made from 1812 to 1816. Muskets made in 1816 are actually a Type 3 Charleville. The type system is actually also a collector's term, but when you hear 1816, you're probably thinking it's a model of 1816. Well, Harpers Ferry was actually, between the two arsenals, was behind Springfield. Springfield started up and started tooling and production of the model of 1816 before Harpers Ferry. Harpers Ferry starts to get the tooling going by 1818, and by 1819, Harpers Ferry is actually making the model of 1816. And the best way to notice an 1816 is it shares a lot of common characteristics with a French infantry musket of a model of 1777. To help demonstrate this, let's look at a model of 1816. Now, this is actually quite a late Harpers Ferry model 1816, made in 1836, compared to our Charleville. And there's a couple things that you can notice. We'll just work our way from right to left, read it like Arabic. The spring right here is actually within the lock plate, whereas the spring on a Charleville wraps around the edge of that lock plate. We also have, the first thing that should pop out to you is this brass pan is at an angle. This one is not. You can also look at this rear swing swivel that is in the trigger guard. In an 1816, it is built into the trigger guard, whereas up here it is actually separate. As we move along, the cock on a Charleville is going to be flat, and that's actually pretty close to like a model of 1766, whereas the 1816 has a rounded reinforced cock right there. As we move forward, you have a rounded edge of right here for the left side of your lock plate, and for the Harpers Ferry lock plate, it is flat. So those are your key identifiers. Other than that, they both are made of American black walnut. They're both gauged at a 69 caliber. And I'll talk about a little bit more of the interesting parts that these Type 3s share with the 1816. But overall, that's our general differences. But we're not here to talk about 1816s. We are here to talk about American Charlevilles, Type 3s, and we'll just start from the buttstock. So you can see RG, that's the initials of probably who had it. It's got that high arch right here, very reminiscent of French infantry muskets of the 1766 to like 70 era. You have your top of your buttstock plate. There is no US, and neither is there a date. So I've seen the Springfield guns. I'm not very familiar with Springfields, but they sometimes have the date actually in the butt plate, which is when the gun was actually made. Harpers Ferry does not have that. We move forward. We've already talked about, you got Harpers Ferry, 1816, 3 separate lines. We have a trigger guard down here. The swing swivel is separate. You have a flat cock that was talked about. We have our United States stamp right there. There it is. Beautiful bald eagle. That is a US in the shield on its chest. That is very worn out. It in one of its talons is holding a batch of arrows for war, and one in talon is holding its olives for peace. And it looks like it is looking towards the cock, which usually they're not supposed to look towards the war side, but I don't know about that. As we flip it around, that's the interesting part. You can see Ohio, that is the state stamping, the US stamping, and the P proof mark, P facing towards the lock side with the eagle on top. I'm going to talk about that in a bit, so don't worry, we'll come back to that. And then you have your side plate. Moving over, we got some more inspector's marks. I'll continue to talk about that when we get to it. As we move forward, this beautiful black American walnut stock. We got our lower or rear barrel band held in by spring tension. You have a middle barrel band held in by spring tension with your swing swivel right there. And then as we end, you have your nose cap that also acts as a barrel band with your held in by spring tension with an iron front sight post. Anyone knows their French infantry muskets or American model 1816 Charlevilles, something's off about that, and your bayonet lug on the top. Okay, that was our speed run, but don't worry, we have more to come dealing with that. So, how do we get to this? What the collectors would call a Type 3 Charleville. Between 1812 to 1813, Harpers Ferry manufacturing goes through some improvements. The most notable is that the trigger guard goes from a rounded end like this. Well, it goes from a pointed end to a rounded end. So this is a rounded end. And I have my handy dandy Veteran Arms French Infantry Musket Charleville right here. And this is the pointy end. So they changed from having pointy ends to rounding ends. But some as late as 1816 still have these pointy end trigger guards. So you can see those two trigger guards right there. Smith says that, you know, because the locks and other parts are in hand in the arsenal for 6 months to a year, that they're probably leftover parts and they're all thrown together, also old tooling. I would also add in that this is during the War of 1812, so I would assume that the federal arsenals are all about production quantity as much as they can be while retaining quality. They're trying to get as many guns out the door as possible because they have a war to fight. These are the war years. So that's my addition, but we'll just that's what just makes sense to me.
And to really expand on that, by the time the war ended, it was estimated that 240,000 American muskets were lost or destroyed during the War of 1812, or as you can refer to it, the American extension to the Napoleonic Wars, met with mixed reviews. Another interesting fact is that there is a Secretary of War that writes a letter that says, after the war, the French expect their arms to last 50 years. The Americans, they expect theirs to last 20 due to the rough wilderness and geography of the continent. The War of 1812 ends in 1815, and American history books are going to chalk that one up as a win. Canada, you did not burn down the White House. Canada, you were not a country at the time, so that didn't count. The War of 1812 provides us with two great national American songs. The first being the Battle of New Orleans by Johnny Horton, and the second one being the Star-Spangled Banner, which would go on to become the American national anthem. At Harpers Ferry in 1816, they produced 6,416 muskets. Those are all new muskets. None of those muskets are included as repaired. Half of these were of the Type 3. And remember, the Type 3 has that round trigger guard. All right, with that initial visual inspection out of the way, let's move on to the next part. And that is what I, as a collector, am looking for when I'm purchasing this gun, and then also why I bought the gun. First things first, I'm using U.S. military Flintlocks, Muskets, and their Bayonets by Peter A. Schmidt. This book is a go-to for anyone interested in collecting early American firearms, especially the Charleville patterns, the 1816s, from Springfield, Harpers Ferry, and all the contractors. There's actually two parts of this, and it's a great source to have, by Peter A. Schmidt. All right, so why this piece of history? Well, I have really two collections I'm trying to build out. One is muskets from the American Revolutionary War. I already have the French Infantry Musket, but there's plenty more to go in that area. And then my second idea, the second collection I'm trying to build is Harpers Ferry military service weapons made there at the arsenal from the early 1800s until the destruction of the arsenal in 1862, having a piece to represent each of the major changes. It's kind of a dual sort of military arms interest and then early American industry and industrialization and all the headaches and the advancements that were made during that. This gun comes up on auction, and I was following it for about a month, and I was pretty interested in it. I was like, all right, this can fulfill part of my collection. I don't have an American Charleville. It's also cool to have a Charleville, considering that's what everyone calls every early gun a Charleville, but it's neat to have one that was actually called a Charleville pattern. And I saw this one come up, and I looked at the pictures online. I reached out to the auction house. They were great. They sold it as a Harpers Ferry 1816 musket, I think was the name. It didn't really have any details. They didn't really tell you about the proof marks or the inspector's marks or anything like that. But they did provide. I reached out and they did provide photos. Specifically, I was curious to see the breech of the barrel to see if this was a reconversion. And then also I wanted to see that Ohio stamping and the proof marks, inspector's marks, and all that. So that was great. Auction day comes up. It's a very short bidding war. I win the gun at $1,500. In total, I spent $2,100 when you add taxes, fees, buyer's premiums. All right, so $2,100. And then once I did shipping and handling, that was another $200. So it's $2,300 overall. So I was like, all right, that's an investment. But this is building towards a cause here.
with that said, the gun shipped perfectly, and then I purchased the firearm. Oh, I had also gone online and see, like, what did these guns sell for? I've seen, there's actually quite a few Ohio stamped Harpers Ferry guns out there, and they're all stamped in the same way on the breech. And I averaged it out between the four I was able to find. All Harpers Ferry made Charleville Type 3 muskets made about 1815 and 1816. So I actually had a good little selection to choose from. And they were all, and I averaged it out to about $2,300-$2,400, so I paid right there on the average. So that is the whole auction experience. All right, the next part is let's look at the inspector marks and what Schmidt says should be on a correct musket that hasn't been touched. Who are the inspectors? Where are the marks? And what am I looking for? All right, let's get to it. On the wood, opposite of the lock, you will find a V for viewed, and then a J and an S. I know that is very worn down, but that is the location of where the superintendent's final inspection mark would be. This would either put in after the superintendent himself or a very trusted associate had done the final inspection for the musket. James Stubblefield was the second superintendent of Harpers Ferry Arsenal from 1807 to 1829. He actually took the job after Eli Whitney turned it down. Another mark we're going to find over here is a V. See right there. And an AT. Those are some more stampings. So a V and an AT. I wasn't able to find out any more information about this AT initials on the stock. I was able to find that through 1815, there was a V and an MH. That was for an unknown inspector. Maybe it's just for the stock inspection or right before you send it to the final inspector. I don't know. I wasn't able to find the answer to that. So if anybody knows the answer to that, please leave a comment down below. I would love to know. I have seen it on other 1816 Ohio stamped guns, actually. So I've seen the stamp before, just we do not know who it belongs to. So the next part of stampings are going to be the ones that are located on top of the breech, and we're going to go over them real quick, but those are going to be the proof mark, which is this one closest to the bottom. You got your U.S. government stamping there, marked as U.S. property, and then we have this state stamping for Ohio. So let's break down the stampings.
All right, so I thought it would be interesting to actually talk about barrel proofing and how they did it at the time and why was it so important. Well, basically, barrel proofing is you're putting the musket barrel through a very important stress test to see if it's going to fail, crack, explode, or anything like that. And the reason you do this is because they are lacking a lot of very high precision machinery and instruments to actually test the barrels and how good the quality of the metal is. So in order for you to really test it, you take the musket barrel and you put it through that high stress test with a lot more powder than any average infantryman would ever load, even ones with a low IQ. And what's interesting is that we actually have the receipts from one of these testers. His name was Louis Grisky. He worked at the Schuylkill Arsenal, and he actually inspected 3,319 musket barrels from May to December in 1 year. He only passed 2,805. I'll save you the time doing the math because I just did it. That is only an acceptance rate of 84%. So that's really not that high if you take into consider all things. But we also have to make sure that, I'm going to make sure I mention that those were actually contractor barrels that were sent in to be inspected by a federal inspector. But again, very interesting that you only had an acceptance rate of 84%. So we actually have some interesting primary sources that will account for how they actually proofed a barrel at Harpers Ferry. Colonel Whitting was in the U.S. Army. He was traveling from Springfield Arsenal where he had inspected arms there, and then he comes to Harpers Ferry Arsenal in January of 1810, and he takes a copious amount of notes about not just barrel proofing, but overall all the inspections conducted on a musket. So for the barrel specifically, the barrel would go through 6 close examinations. When it came to actually test fire the barrel would be charged with 1 ounce of black powder, which is around 437 grains. It would also have 2 patches and a ball. It would be set off. They would examine it to see if there was any cracks and if they had any sort of questions about the barrel, they would run that test again. Interesting to note that if the barrel failed the inspection, the cost of the loss of that barrel actually came out of the welder's. He would be deducted in pay for that loss. Another way I read about how they did real inspections on the barrels was they would plug the vent hole and they would fill them full of water and they would leave them out overnight. So if you come up in the morning and there is water dripping out of it, obviously that barrel has failed. If the barrel passes all of that, it's going to receive its proof mark, which is the P with the eagle head on top. This one has the P facing towards the lock plate. The next mark on the breech of your barrel is actually the U.S. Government ownership mark, and you can actually trace that, the use of the U.S. marking its equipment, weapons, and gear all the way back to the American Revolution. In 1777, Congress stated that American muskets should be stamped with U states or United States. So you actually will see that in American Revolutionary War muskets, where it will have U states or United States right here after or at the end of the war, and after the war you would see U.S. on your lock plate right here, facing either vertically or horizontally. You would also see it stamped onto the breech of the barrel. So that's basically just a continuation of that ownership. And what's also kind of interesting for myself is that this whole marking of U.S. government property continues to this day for American small arms. I remember my M16A4 had U.S. government property on it. So yeah, just a continuation from 1777 through to today. But next, let us talk about the state of Ohio stamping. So now we get to do a deep dive into early American history, which is my favorite. Basically, the founding fathers of the United States were very wary of having a standing army, and so they basically relied on the three pillars of national defense, and that's going to be very much crowdsourcing. That's going to be your very small but regular and professional army, and then you're going to have the ability to call up state volunteer troops, and then at your baseline is going to be your militia. So the Militia Act of 1808 comes out and kind of explains how they're going to use federal funds, about $200,000 a year, which I did the math, and if we assume that the budget is $11 million and they're spending $200,000, they're spending about 2% of the national GDP to send out and help arm the militia. But this is all at the state level, so the Militia Act is going to cover things about who's in charge of the arms, that the arms are supposed to be turned back into the state arsenals at the end of any campaign, and that how states are supposed to be called up and what rights, at what times the president can call up the state. So that's the Militia Act of 1808. The national armories are not intended to fill out the ranks of the state militia, though. They do allocate arms by population to states, and you could actually use basically like a credit system to purchase, if you're the state, you could purchase muskets from the federal government and have them sent to your state. I found some really interesting guidelines that came out by the Ordnance Department in 1830, and it kind of really shows you on what they want to do with the Bess. They want to keep their newest made muskets centrally located at the arsenals in case, like, break glass in case of emergency, and they're trying to offload all of their older muskets. And they state that in 1830, no musket, rifle, or pistol manufactured at Springfield or Harpers Ferry since January 1st of 1820 will be issued from the arsenal or depots in times of peace, either to the troops of the United States or the militia, unless special instructions are therefore given. But weapons produced before 1st of January 1820, those are fair game. I was able to find out from the book that between 1808 and 1819, 4,205 muskets were sent to the state of Ohio. And Ohio doesn't receive another shipment of muskets until 1829, and we can just assume that those are model of 1816 muskets. In 1819, Ohio does receive 1,200 Flintlock muskets. So you would assume that you can make the argument that this could have been one of those 1,200 muskets that was sent to the state of Ohio at the time. I haven't been able to find any absolute concrete evidence when these guns went to Ohio. During my online research, when I've been looking around online, I have found about 4 or 5 Ohio stamped muskets, and a couple of them are actually flintlock conversions or percussion conversions. When I first saw the percussion conversion, I kind of got a little worried, thinking, oh, maybe it's a Civil War stamping. But I found some good flintlocks that have the Ohio stamping, and it would make sense by the time that the Civil War rolled around that these guns would have been not the newest and greatest thing, so they probably would have been issued to rear echelon troops, maybe prison guards. But like I said, I don't really have any concrete evidence for that. That's just my assumption. But yeah, so that's the story of how the Ohio musket, or this musket, could have ended up in Ohio and received its state property stamping.
On our stock, we have an assembly mark 7 right here. It's quite hard to see. Assembly number, assembly marks, just they should be matching is all you really need to know. I don't know if they should all, because they're all fitted in the factory, so as many matching pieces as you can get. So that includes the side plate screws. We have a hash marks right there for 4 and right there for 4. The lower barrel band has our 4 right there. And then our middle barrel band does not have a 4. And our nose cap does not have a 4. All right, so if you've stuck along this, if you've been around this long for the video, you've probably noticed what's wrong. But let's start talking about it. Okay, so we're gonna start with the barrel bands first. The middle barrel band and this top barrel band, I noticed they don't have the assembly numbers. So I was like, okay. Also, that is iron. That should be brass. I did see another one online that looks like that one was also iron, but I have no confirmation on that. Why this is important, because I was like, all right, so these two pieces are not correct. This middle and lower barrel band are not up to par. So I was like, I wonder what's going on with my stock. So my stock is falling apart. And when you look at it, yep. You notice? Let's take it back. Right there. This stock is actually 2 pieces. And that really shows you the break. So that makes sense, because where does this stock turn into 2 pieces? Well, it turns into 2 pieces on the lower barrel band. All right, so that is my first set of questions. What do you guys think out there in the U-Hoobs tubes? Like Ethan from 11 Bang Bang, I know he has a 2-piece stock. What do you think about that? Do you think that is more modern? Do you think that's an arsenal? I mean, the fact that you can see it imprint seems like didn't happen yesterday. I unfortunately did not feel like I could not get this not lock plate, this trigger guard off. I don't really feel like damaging anything. Underneath the trigger guard should be another assembly mark. All right, so we have a 2-piece stock. And now for the finale. What's wrong with my Charleville Type 3? This, unfortunately, is a reconversion to Flintlock. And yeah, it got through. I was almost entirely just looking at the barrel when I bought it when I won that auction. I was like, oh, the barrel doesn't seem to have any marks. Well, it's kind of hard to see, but that drill hole, that's quite modern. You can see kind of the iron, the metal work around it where they kind of cleaned it up. But I do take solace in the fact that the 7 on the 7 that is on this barrel matches the 7 on the bottom half of that stock. So at least the stock and the barrel have been together. Also, the stock has the correct inspector's marks. Now let's look at this lock plate. Yeah, you can tell the coloring. I knew the coloring was off. I was like, oh, maybe somebody fixed the pan and the cock on their own. Like at an arsenal, I was hoping for that, but what really set me off is this. I'm gonna snap my finger. This does not, this hammer doesn't go any further than that, so it's not parallel to the deck. So I was like, well, that hammer's not correct. It does close tightly. And then I flipped it over. I was like, yeah, that metal work. Look at, there's an end. That metal work looks pretty nice. So I actually talked to Joshua. I'll link to him down below. He is a armsmith, locksmith. He has an awesome Instagram page. And I sent it to him. And I was asking his just general thoughts, because I've never taken a full lock apart. And he was just like, those look like milling marks. I was like, yep, you're correct. And that's all I really need to see. And then what really just set it in is you can barely tell. There it is. The discoloration between the pan right here and here, it looks almost like lead, is what I've asked a friend. So you can see where they use the lead to add on the pan. I don't know much about conversions, so I don't know, how that works. They did a great job though. Like, just looking at it, obviously the coloring was off, but if you see it at that angle, but everything else seemed fine. But you can see right there the lead. Basically, long story short is, yeah, this is a reconversion to Flintlock. This was a percussion at one point or another. Also, that screw looks pretty flat. This color right there, that looks pretty. The coloring on that spring, I don't know even what to call it. That looks pretty new. But my question is, what are your guys' thoughts? When do you think this was converted? And I take solace in the fact that the online auction I bought this off said it just came from it was surplus by somebody, and they didn't go out of their way to say that it was like all authentic. They just said Harpers Ferry Musket. So whatever, it's in my hands. I've learned a lesson, and yeah, that basically wraps up my thoughts on this lock plate. Right here, I kind of want to talk about, a gentleman at the reenactment, he brought up, because this is when I was still kind of figuring out, I sent him this, and this is what really sent me down the rabbit hole, because he said, let's pull the trigger. If you can see that, this cock, the flint hits down here, so the timing on the cock is off. So that's what really said, hey, when I showed it to somebody that had like experienced eyes, because I'm not a mechanic. I don't have much actual practical gunsmithing knowledge at all. Absolutely do not have that. So I'm very thankful to people that have been able to be so helpful to me and point things out to me, and it's been great. But yeah, so that's what really set it off. Someone's like, the timing on the timing was off, and with that off, I was able to really piece it together. I also should have noticed that this was bent. So I thought I'd wrap up and go over sort of the lineage of the musket, and why did America end up choosing this Charleville pattern? Why did they use this French infantry pattern of 1766 with all of its additions? Well, we have to remember, this is the first gun that is being produced completely in-house by the fresh United States of America, and they choose this, which is on the bottom, is an original French infantry musket. They choose this musket type for a few reasons. One, they have a lot of them left over from the American War of Independence, so they've already have experience with handling the guns, but that also means they have a lot of excess parts. So a lot of these guns that are being put together in the beginning actually are going to have parts that they're pulling off of old French muskets. Two, the men that are building these guns, such as Joseph Perkins, the first superintendent of the Harpers Ferry Arsenal, he actually spent time during the war putting and fixing and repairing French infantry muskets. Three, so they have all that knowledge, and they have all the guns. At least 105,000 of these French muskets were sent to the American cause during the American Revolution. So they had them in stores in varying levels of quality, but they had the guns, they had the knowledge, and so why not go with something that you understand, right? I was curious because I was like, why not go with the model of 1777? So the 1777 has been around by 1795 or so. It's been around for almost 17 years. So what I was able to find is that there was actually a contract from Virginia in which they purchased a few thousand of, they called them brass-mounted model 1777s that were used by the Royal Guard.
And that didn't quite add up. I think it's actually a 1774 because those had brass mountings. But they had these 1777s. They're at least in Virginia. America had, they fought the American Revolution, and the French carried 1777s at Yorktown. So America had experience with the gun. The 1777 has a lot of, such as this 1816, it has a lot of benefits over the 1766 model on the bottom. One of them being this brass pan. It doesn't corrode. I mean, my original French infantry musket down here, that brass pan is very corroded, mine, that's not brass. The iron pan is very corroded compared to the brass pans of the 1777s. The 1777s, especially the original ones that were coming out under the Royal Arsenal, were very high quality muskets. But it all just comes back to they were going to go with what the early American firearms production between the two federal arsenals, Springfield and Harpers Ferry. They actually, 1794, they're giving permission to make 4, and but they had those 2 arsenals up and running. And I've been reading a really interesting book about the startup of Harpers Ferry and the amount of work it goes. Harpers Ferry, when it was chosen as the site to be the federal arsenal, was basically chosen off of politics. George Washington wanted it there, and that's where it went. His Secretary of War disagreed with him. He had multiple people in his executive that disagreed with him, so they choose Harpers Ferry to be the production facility that they're going to build. With that being said, so if you're starting from scratch, they're going to go with what they want. And that's where we get to these Type 3s that I found very interesting, because I was looking at a Type 3 compared to 1766, and the barrel is longer on a 1766, and that didn't quite seem to add up to me. But then the more I looked into it, the models of 1808 and the models of 1812, they actually start to incorporate some of the design features of the 1777, and you can see how they designed those 1777 design features in the model of 1816. Again, rounded edges, rounded cock, and the brass pan. The location of the barrel springs it's basically the same as for 1777. But it's really hard to just up and tool out and make a whole new model of gun or pattern of gun. So what they do is they make those incremental steps from the Type 1s and Type 2s, which are more close to the French Infantry Musket of 1766, towards the French Infantry Musket of 1777 type of gun, which is American terms would be the model of 1816. And so hopefully you enjoyed that rapid fire talk. I'm just very excited. Overall, I'm very happy to have the piece. It's another great piece to have in the collection. I learned a lot from it. I'm not going to lie. I was pretty disappointed that I saw it was a reconversion, that I fell for it. I'm in no means an expert. I'm just a guy who's being a dude that's got books and likes to read. I'm all about learning. If you see anything that you want to tell me, or something that point out to you, or something you disagree with, please leave a comment down below. I'm trying to get this whole YouTube culture going where we kind of share our muskets, because you can really crowdsource information. Ethan from 11 Bang Bang has been so good at this on his YouTube videos. I love how he's breaking down his guns so he can I can look at what he has and see what he has, and I can kind of use that to build that knowledge base. But with that being said, that is the end of the video for the day. If you enjoyed what you watched, please like, subscribe, comment, you know what to do. And until next time, take care.